Everyone said the same thing. Weaken China's economy and America wins. It worked. China's economy is genuinely collapsing, and that is the most dangerous thing that could have happened to us. You remember 2008? You watched your savings disappear, your house go underwater, the whole system shake. Everyone was looking at the same thing, the ticker, the headlines, the panic. While America was watching its economy burn, China was catching every supply chain we dropped, every factory we closed, every market we left. They didn't just fill the gap, they became the gap. Here's what nobody is connecting out loud. That factory in your county that just reopened, the one the local news called a comeback story. It's competing against a country that is selling products at a loss just to keep its workers employed and its government stable. Imagine sitting down at a poker table against someone who's already lost everything. They're not playing to win, they're playing to not collapse. That's a different kind of dangerous. I went through reporting from Rhodium Group, the independent firm that builds shadow GDP estimates when you can't trust Beijing's numbers. The US-China Economic and Security Review Commission, the body Congress created specifically to track this. With subpoena access, Beijing can't block. Capital Economics, the Council on Foreign Relations. 12 hours of data. Here's the pattern nobody's putting in the same sentence. China produced more goods in 2025 than any year in its history, and its own people bought less than they did 5 years ago. That gap between what China makes and what China can sell at home has to go somewhere. It went everywhere. China's trade surplus hit $1.19 trillion in 2025, the largest in recorded human history. Think about what that means in real terms. That's more than the entire economy of Mexico flowing out of one country into every market on Earth in a single year. That's not a trade story, that's a pressure system. China's factory prices have fallen for 41 consecutive months as of early 2026. That is the longest industrial deflation streak of any major economy since Japan in the 1990s. Japan called that stretch the lost decade. It took them 30 years to crawl out. But Japan is an island economy of 120 million people. China is 1.4 billion, and its factories don't slow down when prices fall. They export harder. When American tariffs hit, China didn't slow down. It redirected. Exports to Africa surged, Latin America, Southeast Asia. Every country that was just starting to build its own manufacturing base, trying to be the next factory of the world, the next supply chain partner America needs, got flooded with Chinese goods priced below what any local factory can match. Those countries don't become the next manufacturing hub. They stay dependent on China. While we're trying to build allies, Bloomberg interviewed a 24-year-old in Beijing, college graduate, lost her job when her company downsized, opened a cocktail stall to survive, closed it 3 months later. Drinks from delivery apps, a few cents each, wiped her out. She went back to look for her old factory job. It now pays 35% less than when she left. She's not a statistic. She's the human face of what happens when a government chooses to keep factories running instead of letting them fail. And the decision her government made to keep those factories alive at any cost is the exact decision now competing with your paycheck. Her loss and your loss are connected. Nobody told you that. That factory in Ohio making solar components. The one in Michigan making steel parts for EVs. The one in Pennsylvania making industrial equipment. They're not competing against a Chinese company trying to make a profit. They're competing against a Chinese government trying to survive. You cannot win a price war against a government that prints money to keep factories running. The math doesn't work. And Washington is not telling you that clearly enough. Everything you just saw is the economic story. Here's the political one. Most people are reading this story one way. China's economy weakens, so it exports more. That's A causes B. Simple, logical, makes sense on the surface. But here's what's actually happening. A is China's deflation. Factories producing more than anyone will buy. Prices collapsing for 3 straight years. B is the export flood. $1 trillion of cheap goods pouring into every market on Earth, undercutting factories in Ohio, in Mexico, in Vietnam, in every country America needs as a partner. Most people stop at A, causes B. Export more because you're selling less at home. Obvious. But there's a C in the middle that nobody's reporting. C is political survival. Beijing's legitimacy doesn't come from elections. It comes from one thing: stability, jobs, the promise that this generation lives better than the last. The moment that promise breaks, the regime has a problem it can't solve with stimulus. So Beijing keeps the factories running at any price. Not because it makes economic sense, because the alternative is instability. And instability, for this government, is existential. A causes C, C causes B. China's deflation threatens the regime's survival, so the regime exports the pain outward, to your market, your industry, your town. That's the gear nobody's tracking. Scroll through the last 100 years of authoritarian governments facing economic collapse. Count how many quietly accepted decline. Germany 1930s, economic humiliation turned outward. Argentina 1982, a failing junta launched the Falklands War to survive politically. Japan in the 1930s, stagnation at home, expansion abroad. This is not a prediction, this is a pattern. And experts at CSIS, at the Council on Foreign Relations, at Johns Hopkins are all flagging the same thing: a China facing economic woes may become more aggressive, not less. CSIS published a framework economic indicators of what China's pre-positioning looks like before a Taiwan contingency. Now, pull up what China has actually been doing for the last 3 years. Check the list. Then, check it again. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. While Washington is fighting Beijing over trade, Walmart is sitting across the table from Chinese suppliers, demanding they cut prices another 10%, because China's deflation is good for Walmart's margins. American corporations are actively incentivizing the exact behavior that's undermining American manufacturing. The enemy in this story isn't just Beijing, it's the supply chain logic that every major American retailer built over 30 years and still hasn't walked away from. Beijing didn't create this trap alone. We helped build it. Every time we chose the cheaper shelf price over the domestic factory, we handed them another brick. Every factory America is trying to reshore right now is being born into a market where its main competitor is selling below cost, subsidized by a government fighting for its own survival. The solar panel factory in Georgia, the battery plant in Michigan, the semiconductor fab in Arizona. They're not just competing against cheaper labor, they're competing against a political decision Beijing made to keep its regime alive. That's not a market force, that's a weapon. And we're pretending it's just economics. 6 months from now, the factories America is reshoring are competing against Chinese goods repriced 20% lower than last year. Because China's factories are literally selling at cost to survive. 12 months. Beijing faces its sharpest political window. Economic pain at home peaks. Youth unemployment stays elevated. Nationalist sentiment is running hot. A regime that can't feed its legitimacy with growth looks for something else to run on. 18 months, the window that multiple defense analysts have flagged as the period of maximum risk in the Taiwan Strait. Not because China is strong, because China is cornered. A congressional commission told lawmakers that a conflict over Taiwan could wipe out as much as 10% of global GDP. That's not a think tank hypothetical. That's the single largest economic shock in modern history, bigger than 2008. And it becomes more likely, not less, every quarter Beijing can't find another answer to the question its own people are asking. You don't have to believe China will invade Taiwan to understand what's happening. You just have to understand what a government with no good options left tends to do with the options it has. Everything I've shown you, the deflation, The surplus, the zombie factories, the redirected exports, the arrow reversals, that's the surface story. Here's what's actually happening underneath. The real danger of China's economic collapse isn't that China falls. It's that a government that can no longer deliver prosperity to 1.4 billion people has two tools of legitimacy left: nationalism and military prestige. Every quarter the economy fails to recover, those two tools become more tempting, not less. You felt like something was off about the way this story was being told. You were right. It was never a trade story. It's a survival story, and survival stories don't end quietly. Worst case, roughly 1 in 5. China's deflation deepens. Domestic unrest rises. Beijing engineers a Taiwan provocation that spirals beyond what either side can control. A congressional commission put the economic damage at up to 10% of global GDP. Your 401k, your mortgage rate, the price of everything in your house, all reset simultaneously. Most likely, this is the one I'd bet on. China slowly exports its economic pain for the next decade. Every market America needs to rebuild manufacturing in gets undercut first. The jobs come back, but slower than the political window that funded them. The reshoring story becomes a decade-long grind instead of a comeback. Best case possible, but narrow. Beijing genuinely pivots to domestic consumption, accepts slower growth, reduces the surplus. The political cost of doing that inside the CCP is enormous. History doesn't favor it, but it's not impossible. 1. Watch where China's exports are going, not just what tariffs are doing. The tariff headline is the visible move. The export redirection is the actual play. 2. Track Beijing's domestic stability signals, not GDP numbers. Youth unemployment, consumer confidence, property price data. Those tell you more about what Beijing will do next than any official growth figure. 3. Understand that the trade war is the story being told. The political survival of a 1.4 billion person authoritarian government is the story that matters. Those are not the same story, and only one of them affects your life directly. Everything in this video is sourced and linked in the description. Here's how I approached it. I cross-referenced official Chinese government data against Rhodium Group's shadow estimates. They've been doing independent China GDP tracking for over a decade. Then checked both against the US-China Security Review Commission's congressional reporting, which has access Beijing can't block. Here's what I don't know, and I want to be straight about this. China's real unemployment figures are state-controlled and almost certainly worse than reported. The PLA's actual readiness timeline is classified, and what Xi Jinping is actually being told inside the room versus what he's saying publicly, that's above everyone's pay grade. Everything here is public data. The interpretation is mine. The gaps are real. There's a dock worker somewhere in Savannah or Long Beach watching containers come off a ship tonight. He doesn't know if the factory that made what's in those boxes is profitable. He doesn't know if the government that subsidized those goods can hold together another year. He doesn't know that a decision made in Beijing to keep a factory running that should have closed is the reason the bid on his next contract just came in lower than he expected. He just knows the shift ends at 6, and the price on the shelf went down again. That's the part of this nobody says out loud. We got cheaper stuff, and in exchange, without anyone asking us, we handed the switch to someone who is now fighting for their political survival. With our supply chains, our markets, our rebuilding story is a weakening China more dangerous than a strong one, or less? I don't think there's one right answer, and I think that's exactly the point. Drop your answer in the comments. I read everyone. Save this. 6 months from now, when this conversation gets louder, you'll want to have already understood the setup. And if you want to understand the full picture now, you know what China's deflation does to the world. What you don't know yet is what the last government that ran this playbook looked like from the inside right before everything changed. That one's a whole other story.